Let's shift focus onto this. There's been an increase in the number of abandoned babies since the COVID-19 lockdown started in March. Level 5 and Level 4 regulations stalled adoption processes, resulting in more babies needing care. For more on this, we're joined by the Chairperson of the National Adoption Coalition of South Africa, Katinka Pieterse. Katinka, thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. Before we find out what the situation is like now, perhaps to get an appreciation of the process itself in terms of adoption. What did we see before the lockdown and what are we seeing?
Good day. Yes, thank you. The procedure for adoption are normally described as a complex bureaucratic process, and it takes quite a lot of time, and there's a lot that needs to happen. So even prior to lockdown, there were specific challenges, specific systemic challenges where the sector often struggles to coordinate and streamline processes. But at least there were a constant flow of movement of children into alternative family care, which was not the case when lockdown was introduced. And I think this is where a bit of a build-up has started to form, since only at a later level, level 3, we were allowed again to look at the movement of children into care from a child protection perspective.
You speak of a build-up. What is it that we are seeing at the moment?
Well, adoption numbers generally are not that high in South Africa, but we have around 1,200 adoptions that are registered annually in South Africa. Now, children that normally benefit from adoption, which is a prescribed legal process or form of alternative care for children without families, they normally spend some time in temporary safe care with the view to place them with their forever families once all the legal requirements have been met and all the checks and balances are in place. Now that takes some time, but when you don't have the process flowing normally, you will find that children remain in temporary care for longer periods. So their placement into families are delayed, which is to the detriment of children, because we are well aware that children need to be placed with families as soon as possible and grow up in family environments, specifically within that first window of 1,000 days in a child's life.
And of course, this means that shelters that are looking after these children face more pressure. What are we seeing where that is concerned, and what sort of relief or help are they receiving?
Absolutely. I have to say that I think even prior to lockdown, we've had challenges with places of temporary care being very full, and that we often struggle to find appropriate placements for children. So this has been a challenge. But I think what happened in lockdown was specifically that we saw a definite spike or increase in the number of abandoned children that were referred to organizations, specifically those organizations that continue to render these child protection services as part of essential services. And obviously, when you remove those children from hospital, you have to legally admit them into a registered, screened place of temporary care, which is approved by both government and the court. And obviously, these places were quite full even prior to lockdown. And what happened was that when we started getting an increase in referrals during lockdown, we often struggled and had to phone around quite a lot and really coordinate as a sector to find appropriate and suitable place. But fortunately, there are places that have actually made provision and could assist us during this period.
When you visit shelters where there are babies, the caretakers will tell you that babies want to be touched, they want to be felt, they want that intimacy. What has this meant in terms of people not being able to even go and volunteer sometime to pick up a baby to give that love?
Yeah, again, this is quite sad because, again, coming back to the theory around bonding and attachment, and again, referring to the first 1,000 days, children need to have constant human contact. And with children that are abandoned or find themselves without family care at a relatively young age, they often have a fear of abandonment. They often don't have the normal ability or incline of children when it comes to loving relationships. So time is of the essence. And what happens is when children end up having a very high ratio of caretaker where their immediate needs are not met for example, if you think of the first life of a child, the first year of a child's life, basic things like immediate response to a child being hungry or having to have a nappy changed is essential for those needs to be met. And although I must really emphasize that the places of temporary care have brilliant support, and they've got volunteers and they've got employees and caretakers that are there permanently, it is not the same as a family. And I think with the lower number of employees and volunteers during lockdown, I'm sure it was tough for these places to actually maintain the level of care and contact that they strive towards.
You mentioned a little bit earlier on that under level 3 lockdown we might see an easing of the backlog. What is your expectation?
Well, there's the reality and then my expectation. What I do know is that the movement of children have been allowed. So first of all, in most cases of organizations working in child protection, we are now allowed to actually apply through the Department of Social Development and courts for the movement of children into alternative care, which includes placements into foster care and residential care as well. So for me, I'm hoping that the sector would be able to work together and to really streamline the process and avoid any other further unnecessary delays, and really work together to ensure that the children that are ready for placement can be placed as soon as possible. We have children that are matched. We have families that are waiting. There are a bit of different challenges. For example, often matchings would happen between families that are in other provinces and children in other provinces. So the whole issue around traveling across provincial borders are still a challenge. But we are hoping that the sector will work together to ensure that we don't cause any further delays in a child's right or prospect to move into his permanent family.
For the work that you do and the many other caregivers do in taking care of these very precious beings, we say thank you. Katinka Pieterse is the chairperson of the National Adoption Coalition of South Africa.